The most dangerous man in the city made one stupid mistake, and it cost him everything. Damian Vale ruled an empire built on fear and fortune, untouchable, unstoppable, until the night arrogance convinced him to send a single photograph to his pregnant wife. No gun could wound him, no rival could break him. But that one image, grinning beside his mistress while his wife waited at home, shattered the only thing his power couldn't protect, the woman who loved him. This is the story of a king who lost his kingdom with a selfie. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Band. The penthouse suite on the 47th floor didn't just overlook the city, it commanded it. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a glittering sprawl of lights that pulsed like a living organism, each glow representing someone who either feared Damian Vale's name or paid tribute to it. The space itself was a monument to excess. Italian marble floors that caught and multiplied the ambient light, furniture that cost more than most people's cars, art on the walls that had been acquired through means best left unexamined. And in the center of all that calculated magnificence sat Clara Vale, 7 months pregnant, folding impossibly tiny clothes with the kind of precision that came from having nothing else to do. Her hands moved automatically, smooth the onesie, align the edges, fold once, twice, 3 times. Each garment no bigger than her palm, each one a promise she was terrified wouldn't be kept. The nursery down the hall stood complete and untouched, painted a soft gray that the designer had called morning mist, and charged an obscene amount to achieve. The crib was assembled. The mobile hung just so. Everything waited in perfect readiness for a life that would enter a marriage Clara was no longer sure existed. She glanced at the dining table. 2 plates, 2 wine glasses, though only one would hold water tonight. 2 napkins folded into triangles the way Damian preferred. The ritual of optimism she performed every evening, setting a table for a husband who rarely came home to sit at it. 7:43 p.m. He'd said 7. Clara told herself traffic was bad, told herself a meeting ran long, told herself the same comfortable lies that had become a second language over the past 8 months, each one a little easier to speak, a little harder to believe. The baby kicked, a rolling movement across her belly that made her gasp and smile simultaneously. She pressed her palm to the spot, feeling the small body shift and settle inside her. "I know," she whispered. "I miss him too." That was the cruelest part. She did miss him. Not the man who'd gradually turned their home into a luxury hotel he occasionally visited, but the man he'd been before the empire grew too large, before power became more seductive than partnership. She missed Daniel. That's what she'd called him in the beginning, before he'd insisted everyone use the harder, colder Damian. She missed the way he used to cook breakfast on Sundays, terrible scrambled eggs that he'd serve with such pride she'd eat every bite. She missed falling asleep tangled together, his hand protective over her hip, his breathing steady against her neck. She missed being chosen. Now she was maintained, provided for, kept in extraordinary comfort in a beautiful cage while her husband built monuments to his own untouchability. Clara set down the onesie, pale yellow with small elephants marching across the chest, and levered herself up from the sofa. Her center of gravity had shifted in ways that still surprised her. Her body transformed into something both miraculous and unfamiliar. She walked to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass, and looked down at the city Damian claimed to own. Somewhere in those lights, he was making decisions, brokering deals, consolidating power, becoming more of whatever he thought he needed to be and less of what she needed him to be. The baby kicked again, harder this time. "Shh," Clara murmured, rubbing slow circles over her belly. "He'll come home. He always does." But even as she said it, she wondered what home meant to a man who'd turned himself into a legend. Across the city, in a restaurant where the wait list was 6 months long and the doors only opened for people who mattered, Damian Vale was proving exactly how much he mattered. He sat in a private room where the lighting was deliberately dimmed to flattering, where the wine cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week, where the woman across from him was most definitely not his pregnant wife. Sienna Crow had the kind of beauty that knew its own power, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that glittered with constant amusement, lips painted the color of fresh blood. She wore danger like perfume, and she'd cultivated an air of reckless sophistication that made cautious men stupid and powerful men careless. Right now, she was making Damien both. "Tell me something," she said, swirling wine in her glass, watching the liquid catch the light. "Do you ever actually go home to that monument you've built? Or do you just keep it as proof you can afford a wife?" Damien laughed, the kind of laugh that didn't reach his eyes, the kind he used when someone said something too close to true. "I go home." "When? Between board meetings and territory expansion?" Sienna leaned forward, her smile sharp. "I've known you for 4 months, Damien. You've mentioned your wife exactly twice, your penthouse 5 times, your empire constantly. What does that tell you?" "It tells me I'm focused. It tells me you're bored." The word landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through Damien's carefully constructed confidence. He reached for his own wine, a Bordeaux that the sommelier had presented like a religious artifact, and took a longer drink than the vintage deserved. "Claire is pregnant," he said, as if that explained everything. 7 months. It's complicated. Everything's complicated when you're trying to justify being somewhere you don't want to be. Sienna's eyes glittered. "What's she like? The wife you never talk about?" Damien shifted in his seat. The question felt like a trap, but he couldn't identify which answer would spring it. "She's good, kind. She'll be a good mother." "How romantic." Sienna's voice dripped mockery. "She's good and kind. The same words you'd use to describe a loyal dog." "That's not—" Damien stopped himself, jaw tightening. "You don't know her." "I don't need to. I know you." Sienna set down her glass and leaned back, studying him with the focus of a predator assessing prey. "You built yourself into something extraordinary, Damien. You command respect. You own fear. Men twice your age move when you speak. And you go home to someone who, what? Folds laundry? Waits patiently? Asks how your day was?" Each word was a careful incision, cutting toward something Damien had been avoiding examining too closely. The truth was, he didn't know what Clara did all day. Didn't know if she was happy or miserable or simply passing time until the baby came and gave her something to focus on besides his absence. "She chose this life," he said, hearing the defensiveness in his own voice. "Did she?" Sienna tilted her head. "Or did she choose a man who became someone else?" The private room suddenly felt too small, too warm. Damien unbuttoned his collar, Tom Ford tailored to perfection, and signaled for more wine he didn't need. "Why are you pushing this?" he asked. "Because I'm curious." Sienna's smile was all teeth. "I want to know if the great Damien Vale is untouchable, or if there's still some small part of you that feels guilty for abandoning a pregnant woman in a tower." "I haven't abandoned her. She has everything she needs. Except you." The waiter arrived with another bottle, breaking the tension with the ritual of presentation and pouring. Damien watched the wine fill his glass and wondered when he'd stopped being able to enjoy these moments, when luxury had transformed from achievement to anesthetic. "I provide for her," he said once the waiter had retreated. "The penthouse, security, the best doctors money can buy. She'll want for nothing." "How noble." Sienna took a delicate sip of wine. "You've bought her a very comfortable prison." "It's not a prison. She's free to—" He stopped, realizing he didn't actually know what Clara was free to do. Leave. She'd never threatened it. Complain. She rarely did. Demand more of his time? She'd stopped asking months ago. The silence that followed felt like an indictment. "You know what I think?" Sienna said, her voice dropping to something almost gentle, almost dangerous. "I think you're terrified." "Of what?" "Of being ordinary. Of being just a husband and father instead of a king. So you've convinced yourself that providing money is the same as providing presents. That being feared by strangers is more important than being loved by your wife." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Tell me I'm wrong." Damien wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself with the same sharp certainty he used in business negotiations. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he felt something uncomfortably close to shame creeping up his spine, and he hated Sienna for putting it there. "This conversation is honest," Sienna finished. "I know. That's why you look like you want to leave. But you won't. Because leaving would mean going home, and you don't actually want to do that, do you?" She was right. He didn't. The penthouse felt like a museum of his own success. beautiful and cold, and Clara had become part of the exhibit, the devoted wife, the perfect accessory to his perfect life. Seeing her meant confronting the gap between who he'd promised to be and who he'd become. It meant facing questions he didn't want to answer. Easier to stay here, to drink expensive wine with a woman who expected nothing but entertainment. Another bottle? Sienna suggested, her eyes bright with victory. Damien nodded. At 8:30, Clara's phone buzzed with a text message. Meeting running late. Don't wait up. 6 words, no apology. No acknowledgement of the dinner growing cold on the table. Just a dismissal delivered with the emotional weight of a weather report. Clara stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone face down on the coffee table. She should have been angry. Should have called him back and demanded better. Should have done something other than sit there feeling her heart contract with familiar disappointment. Instead, she picked up another onesie and folded it with mechanical precision. The baby kicked again, a sensation that still filled her with wonder despite its frequency. She was growing a whole person inside her body, creating life from nothing. And somehow, impossibly, she was doing it alone while married to someone who shared her last name but little else. "It'll be different when you're here," she whispered to her belly. "He'll remember what matters. He'll come back." The words felt like prayer, like bargaining with a universe that didn't negotiate. She thought about calling her brother Evan. He'd been suspicious of Damien from the beginning, had warned her that men who needed to prove they were powerful were usually compensating for feeling powerless. But admitting Evan was right would mean admitting she'd made a mistake, and Clara wasn't ready for that conversation. So instead she sat in the glittering penthouse, surrounded by everything money could buy and nothing it couldn't, and folded tiny clothes for a baby whose father was somewhere across the city, becoming more of a stranger. Sarso. By 10 o'clock, Damien was drunk. Not falling down drunk, not slurring his words or losing his balance, but that warm, reckless drunk where consequences felt theoretical and inhibitions melted like ice in summer heat. The kind of drunk where Sienna's laughter sounded like music and her provocations felt like foreplay. They'd left the restaurant an hour ago, ignoring the discreet bill that had been presented and simply walking out with the confidence of people who knew their credit was infinite. Now they were in Sienna's apartment, a loft in the warehouse district that cost a fortune to look deliberately unfinished, and the city lights outside her windows blurred into abstract art. "You're different tonight," Sienna observed. She was curled on her leather sofa, shoes off, wine glass dangling from her fingers. "Less controlled. I like it." "I'm relaxed," Damien said, though that wasn't quite right. Relaxed implied ease. What he felt was more like freefall, the sensation of gravity losing its hold. "You're running," Sienna corrected. "From the monument, from the wife, from the life you've built so carefully." She set down her glass and stood, moving toward him with predatory grace. "Question is, what are you running toward?" She was close now, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something dark and spiced that made him think of forbidden things. Close enough to be a choice. "This is a bad idea," Damien said, but he didn't step back. The best ones usually are. Sienna's hand came up to his chest, resting over his heart. "You've spent months pretending you're satisfied, that your perfect penthouse and perfect pregnant wife are enough. But they're not, are they? Because if they were, you wouldn't be here." Her logic was poison wrapped in truth. Damien knew it, recognized the manipulation, understood exactly what game was being played. And yet he didn't move away, didn't shut it down, didn't do any of the things a faithful husband should do. Instead, he let himself imagine what it would feel like to stop performing, to stop being the untouchable king, the devoted husband, the man who had everything under control, to just be reckless and real and wrong. "Damien," Sienna said softly, her lips very close to his, "when's the last time you did something just because you wanted to? Not because it was strategic or smart or part of the plan, just because you wanted it." He couldn't remember. Every decision for the past 3 years had been calculated, weighed against outcomes and consequences. Even marrying Clara had been partly strategic. She came from a good family, brought legitimacy to his empire, looked perfect standing beside him at events. When had he stopped choosing things just because they made him happy? "Prove it," Sienna whispered against his ear. "Prove you're not just a man performing being powerful. Prove you can still be dangerous." How? The word came out rougher than intended. Sienna pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes glittering with challenge. Take a picture with me, right now. Something real. Something that shows you're here because you want to be, not because you have to be. Damien's pulse kicked up. That's dangerous? I know. That's the point. She smiled, sharp and knowing. Unless you're too afraid. And there it was. The hook baited with the one thing Damien couldn't resist, a challenge to his courage. His whole empire was built on being unafraid, on staring down threats and never blinking. How could he back down from something as simple as a photograph? I'm not afraid, he said. Then prove it. Sienna pulled out her phone, positioned herself beside him, her body pressed close. Smile like you mean it. She held up the camera. Damien saw their reflections in the screen. Sienna's dark beauty sharp and unapologetic. His own face flushed with wine and recklessness. They looked like people celebrating something, like people who belonged together. The flash went off. Perfect, Sienna said, examining the photo. We look good together, dangerous together. Damien looked at the image over her shoulder. She was right. They did look good. They looked like people living instead of performing, like people who made their own rules. Now send it to her, Sienna said casually. The words dropped into the moment like a grenade. What? Your wife. Sienna turned to face him fully, her expression somewhere between amusement and cruelty. Send her this picture. Prove you're not controlled by fear or guilt or whatever keeps you performing the role of devoted husband. That's insane. That's honest. Sienna's eyes locked on his. Right now, you're playing both sides, keeping your monument safe while sneaking around with me. You want to be dangerous? Then actually be dangerous. Stop performing and start choosing. Damien's heart hammered against his ribs. Every rational cell in his brain screamed that this was a catastrophic idea, that sending that photo would detonate his marriage, that it would hurt Clara in ways he couldn't undo. But the wine was singing in his blood, and Sienna's challenge resonated with something dark and broken in his chest. All those months of pretending to be satisfied, all those nights of going through the motions with Clara, all that performance. Maybe honesty was cruelty. Maybe cruelty was freedom. His thumb hovered over his phone. Clara's contact info. The photo ready to send. Unless you're afraid, Sienna whispered again. Damien Vale had built an empire on being unafraid, on never backing down, on proving he was untouchable. He pressed send. The message went through with a soft whoosh that sounded like a door closing. For one crystalline second, Damien felt powerful, reckless, free. Then reality crashed back in. What did I just... He started, but Sienna was laughing, delighted. You actually did it, she said, her eyes bright with triumph and something darker. The great Damien Vale, choosing chaos over control. I didn't think you had it in you. Damien stared at his phone, at the small, delivered notification under the photo. Across the city, in a penthouse he paid for, his pregnant wife was about to receive an image that would destroy everything. The power he'd felt a moment ago curdled into something sick. I need to... He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't know how to finish it. Take it back? Impossible. Explain it? With what words? Fix it? Too late. Sienna was still smiling, but her expression had shifted to something almost pitying. Welcome to the consequences, Damien. Turns out being untouchable doesn't mean you can't destroy yourself. He looked at her, really looked, and saw clearly for the first time. She wasn't a partner or a lover or even a friend. She was a mirror reflecting his worst impulses, and he'd been too arrogant to see it until after the damage was done. I have to go, he said, already moving toward the door. To do what? Explain? Apologize? Sienna's voice followed him. You sent that photo on purpose, Damien. You can't unsend it. You can't unbreak what you just broke. He didn't answer, just grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator, his heart racing with a panic that felt entirely foreign. Damien Vale didn't panic, didn't lose control, didn't make mistakes. But he'd just made one that might cost him everything. The elevator descent felt endless. Damien pulled out his phone, staring at Clara's contact, trying to formulate words that could somehow mitigate the photo he'd sent. But what could he say? It was an accident? It meant nothing? Both would be lies, and Clara would know it. The truth was worse. He'd sent it because some broken part of him wanted to prove he could, wanted to shatter this careful performance and see what happened. He'd been so focused on being untouchable that he'd forgotten touchable things could still be destroyed by his own hand. The elevator doors opened onto the street. Damien's driver was parked across the street, waiting with the patient stillness of someone paid to never ask questions. Damien climbed into the back of the black Mercedes, and the familiar leather smell usually brought comfort. Tonight it smelled like a tomb. Home, he told the driver. The word felt like a lie, because home implied somewhere you belonged, someone waiting who wanted you there. And Damien was suddenly terribly certain that whatever waited for him in the penthouse on the 47th floor, it wouldn't be home anymore. The city lights blurred past the windows. Somewhere in those glittering streets, people were living small, ordinary lives, having dinner with their families, putting their kids to bed, being present for the people they loved. Damien had scorned that kind of life, had built himself into something larger, more powerful, more important. And in doing so, he'd become exactly the kind of man who would destroy his own marriage with a selfie just to prove he could. The drive took 20 minutes. Each one felt like an hour. Damien's phone stayed silent. No calls from Clara, no texts demanding explanation, just silence. And somehow that was worse than anger would have been. The car pulled up to his building. The doorman, a different one at this hour, someone whose name Damien had never learned, opened his door with professional deference. "Evening, Mr. Vale." Damien nodded, unable to speak, and headed for the private elevator that would take him straight to the penthouse. His monument to success, his cage. The ride-up was smooth and silent. 47 floors passed in seconds. The doors opened directly into his foyer. Italian marble, modern art, everything exactly as he'd specified when he'd bought the place 3 years ago. The lights were on. He stepped inside. "Clara?" His voice echoed in the silence. The dining table still had 2 place settings, the food long since gone cold. But there was something off about the space, something wrong he couldn't immediately identify. Then he realized it was too quiet, too still, the kind of stillness that came not from peace, but from absence. "Clara?" he called again, louder this time. No answer. Damien moved through the penthouse, his panic rising with each empty room. The living room, undisturbed except for a small pile of folded baby clothes on the sofa. The kitchen, clean, untouched. The nursery, perfect and waiting and empty. Their bedroom. He stopped in the doorway. The bed was made with hospital corners. Clara's nightstand had been cleared. No phone charger, no water glass, no book. Her closet door stood open, and even from here he could see the gaps where her clothes had hung. On his pillow sat a small velvet box and a folded piece of paper. Damien's hands shook as he picked them up. The box held Clara's wedding ring, the platinum band with the single perfect diamond he'd spent a month's salary on back when a month's salary meant something. The paper was cream-colored stationery, the kind Clara used for thank you notes. Her handwriting was steady, controlled, completely calm. "Damien, thank you for finally being honest. The photo showed me what words never could, where you want to be and who you want to be with. I've spent 7 months waiting for you to come home, but I understand now that you already are home, just not with me. I won't fight you. I won't make scenes or demands. I'm simply choosing peace for myself and our child. You've built an extraordinary empire. I hope it keeps you warm. I'll contact you through my lawyer about custody arrangements. You're welcome to be a father to this baby, but I'm done being a wife to a ghost." Clara Damien read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. The calm, measured tone didn't crack into anger or pain or anything he could argue against. She'd simply left. He sank onto the bed, the letter still in his hands, and looked around the bedroom. At the custom furniture and designer linens and the view that had cost millions to secure. At the monument he'd built to his own success. For the first time in years, Damien Vale, the untouchable, the fearless, the king of his own empire, felt completely powerless. His phone buzzed. A text from Sienna. So? How'd she take it? He stared at the message, at the casual cruelty of it, and finally understood what Clara must have felt opening that photo. The humiliation, the betrayal, the sudden, sharp clarity that came from seeing exactly how little you mattered to someone you'd loved. Damien didn't respond. Just set the phone down and sat in the enormous bedroom of his empty penthouse, holding his wife's wedding ring and wondering how he'd become the kind of man who could destroy his own life and call it freedom. Outside the windows, the city glittered with a million lights, each one a life being lived, a choice being made, a consequence being earned. And in the silence of his monument, Damien Vale finally understood the price of being untouchable. Eventually, there was nothing left to touch. The first night alone in the penthouse, Damien didn't sleep. He sat in the living room as dawn broke over the city, still holding Clara's letter, watching the sky shift from black to gray to that particular shade of pink that promised a beautiful day. The irony wasn't lost on him. By 7 a.m., his phone had accumulated 23 messages, business contacts wondering where he was, associates waiting for decisions only he could make, Marcus Chen, his second in command, asking if everything was all right because Damien had missed their 6 a.m. strategy call for the first time in 2 years. And one message from Sienna. "You're not answering. Did I break you?" Damien deleted it without responding. He tried calling Clara. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail, her voice bright and warm, recorded back when she still believed he'd want to hear it. "Hi, you've reached Clara. Leave a message and I'll call you back." "Clara, it's me. Please, I need to talk to you. I need to explain." He stopped, realizing he had no explanation that would make this better. "Just call me back, please." He tried again an hour later. This time, it went straight to voicemail. She'd turned off her phone. By noon, Damien was pacing the penthouse like a caged animal, his carefully constructed routine completely shattered. He was supposed to be at a meeting with the Castellano family, discussing territory agreements that had taken months to negotiate. Instead, he was staring at baby clothes his wife had folded before she left, trying to remember the last time he'd actually asked her how she was feeling. His phone rang. For a desperate second, he thought it might be Clara. It was Marcus. "Where the hell are you?" Marcus didn't bother with pleasantries. "The Castellanos are threatening to walk. They think you're disrespecting them by not showing up." "Handle it," Damien said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. Silence on the other end. Marcus had worked for him for 5 years, and Damien had never once told him to handle something alone. "Handle it how?" Marcus asked carefully. "I don't care. Offer them the e-stocks. Give them whatever they want. Just make it go away." "Damien, what's going on? Are you sick? Did something happen?" "My wife left me." The words came out flat, factual. "Last night. She's gone." Another pause. Marcus knew about Clara the way everyone in Damien's orbit knew about Clara. As a fact of his life, a wife who existed somewhere in the background, rarely seen at business functions, never discussed in detail. "I'm sorry, man. Do you need anything?" "I need to find her." "Okay. I can put people on it, discreetly. Where do you think she went?" Damien realized he didn't know. Didn't know if Clara had friends close enough to take her in. Didn't know her favorite places or where she might feel safe. 7 months of marriage and pregnancy, and he couldn't answer the most basic questions about his wife's life. "Try her brother," he said finally. "Evan Hart. Lives somewhere in Riverside, I think." "You think?" "I've never been there." The admission felt like swallowing glass. "She mentioned it once. A house with a blue door." "That's not a lot to go on." "Then figure it out. That's what I pay you for." Damien ended the call and immediately felt worse. Snapping at Marcus wouldn't bring Clara back, wouldn't undo the photo or the months of neglect that had led to this moment. He looked around the penthouse, 4,700 square feet of prime real estate that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. Everything here was chosen for its value, its status, its ability to impress. Nothing was chosen because it felt like home. Clara had tried in the beginning. She'd brought plants that he'd considered clutter, hung photos of them together that disrupted the aesthetic, cooked meals in a kitchen designed for catering, not actual use. Slowly, he'd discouraged each attempt, and she'd stopped trying. When had he stopped noticing her at all? His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Vale, this is Evan Hart. Clara asked me to inform you that she's safe and doesn't wish to be contacted directly. All communication regarding the baby should go through her attorney. She'll be in touch." Damien stared at the message, rage and panic warring in his chest. She was hiding behind her brother, behind a lawyer, running away instead of facing him. Except she wasn't running. She'd left a calm, measured letter. She'd made arrangements. She was protecting herself and their baby from him. From him. The realization hit like a physical blow. Clara wasn't the problem. He was. He texted back, "I need to see her, please, just 5 minutes." The response came quickly. "She said you'd ask." The answer is no. "This is my child too." "Then you should have thought about that before you sent that picture." Damien threw his phone across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying crack but didn't break. Reinforced case, top of the line, because Damien Vale didn't buy anything that wasn't built to last. Except apparently his marriage. He retrieved the phone and tried a different approach. "Tell her I'm sorry." Evan's response was ice cold. "Tell her yourself. When you figure out how to be a man instead of a monument." The words cut deeper because they were true. Damien had spent years building himself into something impressive, something powerful. He'd forgotten how to be human. By evening, the penthouse felt like it was closing in on him. Damien did something he hadn't done in months. He left without security, without a driver, without telling anyone where he was going. He just walked out of the building and into the city, hands in his pockets, face anonymous in the crowd. Nobody recognized him. Nobody stepped aside or showed deference or treated him like he mattered. He was just another person moving through the Friday night rush. And the anonymity was both terrifying and oddly freeing. He found himself outside a small diner, the kind of place he never went, chrome and vinyl and fluorescent lights, a menu laminated and sticky with age. The kind of place Clara would probably love. On impulse, he went inside. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that read Bonnie gestured to a booth by the window. "Sit anywhere, hun. Coffee? Please?" She returned with a mug and a pot, poured without asking how he took it. "You look like you've had a day." Damien almost laughed. "You could say that." "Well, coffee helps, so does pie. We've got apple and cherry." "Apple," he said, though he couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten pie. His chef prepared things with foam and microgreens, deconstructed and artfully plated. Pie felt almost subversive. Bonnie returned with a slice that was thick and generous, ice cream melting over the top. She refilled his coffee without being asked and left him alone. Damien took a bite. It was sweet and simple and probably terrible for him, and it was the best thing he'd tasted in months. He pulled out his phone and looked at the photo that had destroyed everything. Sienna and him, smiling like conspirators, like people who deserved their happiness. The timestamp read 10:47 p.m., exactly when Clara would have been folding baby clothes, setting the table, waiting for him to come home. What kind of man sends a picture like that to his pregnant wife? The kind of man who'd convinced himself that being feared was more important than being loved. "You okay, hun?" Bonnie was back, concern in her weathered face. "My wife left me," Damien said. The words came out easier the second time. "Last night, because I did something unforgivable." Bonnie refilled his coffee again, even though it was still half full. "Unforgivable is a strong word. I sent her a photo of me with another woman. She's 7 months pregnant." "Oh, honey." Bonnie's expression shifted from concern to disappointment. "That's pretty damn unforgivable." "I know. So why'd you do it?" Damien set down his fork. "Because I'm an idiot who thought being powerful meant I could do whatever I wanted without consequences." "And now you're learning different." Bonnie leaned against the booth. "My second husband tried that. Thought because he made good money and paid the bills, he could treat me however he pleased. You know where he is now?" "Where?" "No idea. Haven't seen him in 15 years. She straightened up. "Here's the thing about consequences, hun. They don't care how important you think you are. They show up anyway." She walked away to tend to another customer, leaving Damien alone with his pie and his phone and the growing certainty that he'd destroyed the only real thing in his carefully constructed life. He stayed in the diner for 2 hours, drinking coffee and watching people come and go, couples sharing fries, a woman reading a book in the corner booth, a construction worker eating meatloaf at the counter. Normal people living normal lives, none of them building empires or trying to prove they were untouchable. When he finally left, he overtipped Bonnie 300% and walked back into the night. The weekend passed in a blur of sleeplessness and desperate plans. Damien tried everything he could think of to reach Clara. He sent flowers to Evan's address. They were returned. He tried showing up in person. Evan met him at the door with a baseball bat and a very clear message to leave. He attempted to call Clara's doctor, thinking maybe he could at least get updates on the baby. Patient confidentiality shut that down immediately. By Monday morning, Marcus was at the penthouse with a folder full of reports Damien couldn't focus on and concern written all over his face. "You look like hell," Marcus said bluntly. "Thanks. When's the last time you slept?" Damien waved the question away. "What do the Castellanos want?" "We're not talking about the Castellanos. We're talking about you." Marcus set down the folder. "I've worked for you for 5 years. I've seen you stare down guys who wanted to kill you without flinching. But right now, you look like you're dying." "I'm fine." "You're not. And everyone's starting to notice." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Damien a series of messages. "The Southside crew thinks you're weak. The Moretti family is testing boundaries. 2 of our suppliers have tried to renegotiate terms because they heard you're distracted. Let them try. Damien, listen to me. Your empire is built on you being untouchable, unshakable. The second people think you're vulnerable, they'll come for you. You know this." "I know." Damien rubbed his face. I can't think about territory disputes right now." "Then what can you think about?" "Getting my wife back." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "And if you can't?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Damien had built his entire adult life on the principle that there was nothing he couldn't have if he wanted it badly enough. No problem he couldn't solve with the right application of money, or power, or force. But Clara wasn't a territory to be conquered. She was a person who'd finally had enough. "I don't know," Damien admitted. "Okay, then let me handle the business side while you figure it out. But you need to make the decision soon, because this holding pattern isn't sustainable. Either you get your head back in the game, or what?" Marcus met his eyes steadily. "Or you step back and let someone else run things for a while. Maybe that someone is me. Maybe it's a board of advisors, but you can't be half present. Not in this world. It'll eat you alive." After Marcus left, Damien stood at the window looking out at the city. From 47 floors up, everything looked small and manageable. Problems seemed distant. Consequences felt abstract. But down there, in the actual streets where actual people lived actual lives, Clara was somewhere building a future that didn't include him. His phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello?" "Mr. Vale, this is Jennifer Reeves. I'm Clara's attorney." Damien's heart kicked up. "Is she okay? Is the baby—" "They're both fine. I'm calling to discuss preliminary custody arrangements." "I don't want to discuss custody. I want to talk to my wife." "Your wife doesn't want to speak with you, but she does want to establish clear boundaries regarding your parental rights." Jennifer's voice was professional, brooking no argument. "Are you available to meet this week?" "I want to see Clara." "That's not on the table." "Then nothing is on the table." Damien heard the steel in his own voice, the tone he used in negotiations when he was drawing lines. "I'm not discussing my child with a stranger. If Clara wants to make arrangements, she can make them with me directly." "Mr. Vale, I understand you're upset, but threatening behavior won't—" "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm stating a fact. Clara is my wife. That's my baby. If she wants a divorce, fine. If she wants full custody, we'll discuss it. But she doesn't get to hide behind a lawyer and pretend I don't exist." "She's not pretending you don't exist. She's protecting herself from someone who hurt her." The words landed like a slap. "I know what I did." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, you're more concerned with maintaining control than with acknowledging the harm you caused." Jennifer's professional veneer cracked slightly. "Clara showed me that photo, Mr. Vale. She showed me the letter she left. She told me about the months of being ignored while you built your empire. So forgive me if I don't have much sympathy for your desire to discuss things directly." Damien closed his eyes. "What do you want from me?" "Clara wants you to leave her alone until after the baby is born. She wants space to heal and prepare for motherhood without your chaos. She's willing to set up supervised visitation once the baby arrives, with clear boundaries about your involvement." "Supervised? Like I'm some kind of threat?" "You sent a photo of yourself with your mistress to your pregnant wife at 10:47 at night, Mr. Vale. What would you call that if not threatening?" Damien had no answer. "Here's what's going to happen," Jennifer continued. "I'm going to email you a proposed custody agreement. You're going to review it with your attorney." We're going to negotiate terms like adults. And if you genuinely want to be a father to this child, you're going to respect Clara's boundaries and give her the space she's asking for. And if I don't, then you'll prove exactly what kind of man you are, and Clara will have all the ammunition she needs to limit your parental rights significantly. Jennifer's voice softened slightly. I've been doing this for 15 years, Mr. Vale. I've seen men like you before, powerful, successful, convinced they can control everything. Sometimes they wake up before it's too late. Sometimes they don't. The question is, which kind are you? She ended the call before he could respond. Damien looked down at his phone, at his reflection in the black screen. He looked like a stranger, unshaven, exhausted, hollow-eyed, nothing like the untouchable king he'd worked so hard to become. The email from Jennifer arrived 20 minutes later. Damien opened it on his laptop, reading through the proposed terms with growing horror. Clara wanted primary physical custody. Damien would get supervised visitation every other weekend, contingent on his sobriety and emotional stability. He would pay child support, a significant amount, though nothing he couldn't afford. He would have no say in major decisions about the child's upbringing, education, or medical care unless Clara chose to consult him. Essentially, he would be a stranger who sent checks and showed up twice a month under supervision. The document was professionally written, legally sound, and utterly devastating. Damien's first instinct was to call his own attorney and fight every single line, to use his resources and connections to prove Clara was being unreasonable, to force a more equitable arrangement, to win. But then he read the final paragraph. These terms are designed to protect the minor child from exposure to an unstable or harmful environment. Should Mr. Vale demonstrate sustained commitment to personal growth, emotional maturity, and genuine interest in co-parenting, these terms may be revisited after the child's first birthday. Should Mr. Vale demonstrate sustained commitment to personal growth, Clara wasn't trying to punish him. She was giving him a chance to prove he could change. The realization cracked something open in Damien's chest. For 3 days, he'd been thinking about this situation in terms of winning and losing, control and surrender. But this wasn't a negotiation. It was a consequence. He'd spent months treating his pregnant wife like an afterthought. He'd sent her a photo with his mistress just to prove he could. He'd built an empire while letting his marriage crumble. And now Clara was doing what he should have done months ago. She was choosing peace over chaos, safety over status, love over power. Damien closed his laptop and sat in the silence of his empty penthouse. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Inside, he was finally alone with the man he'd become. And he didn't like what he saw. His phone buzzed with another text from Sienna. Still ignoring me? Come on, Damien. We had fun. Don't let one angry wife ruin everything. He stared at the message for a long moment. A week ago, Sienna's recklessness had felt exciting. Her challenges had made him feel alive. Her disregard for consequences had seemed like freedom. Now he saw her clearly, a bored woman who collected powerful men like trophies and discarded them just as easily. She hadn't cared about him. She'd cared about the game, the conquest, the thrill of watching something burn. Damien blocked her number. It was a small action, barely significant in the grand scheme of his failures. But it felt like the first honest choice he'd made in months. That night, Damien did something he hadn't done since college. He got drunk alone. Not the pleasant buzz from expensive wine, but the ugly, desperate drunk that came from cheap whiskey consumed with intention. He sat on the floor of his bedroom, back against the bed, and systematically demolished a bottle of Jack Daniels while looking through his phone. Photos of Clara. There weren't many. He hadn't taken pictures of her in months, but there were some from early in their relationship. Clara laughing at something off camera. Clara in a sundress at a summer wedding. Clara asleep on his shoulder during a movie, her face peaceful and trusting. When had he stopped looking at her like that? When had she transformed from someone he loved into someone he kept? He found their wedding photos. They'd gotten married at City Hall because Damien had insisted a big wedding was a waste of money. Clara had worn a simple white dress she'd bought off the rack, and she'd been so happy it had hurt to look at her. She'd believed in him. In them. In the future they were building together. What had he given her in return? A penthouse she lived in alone, a baby she was preparing for by herself. And finally, a photo that shattered the last illusion that he cared. Damien's phone slipped from his hands as the room started spinning. He closed his eyes, but that made it worse. So he opened them and stared at the ceiling, at the recessed lighting that had cost a fortune to install, at the crown molding that had been custom designed. Everything in this penthouse was custom designed. Everything except the life he was supposed to be living here. He must have passed out eventually because he woke up on the floor with sunlight burning through the windows and a headache that felt like divine punishment. His phone was dead. His mouth tasted like regret. His body ached from sleeping on hardwood that cost $300 per square foot. Damien dragged himself to the shower and stood under water hot enough to hurt, trying to wash away the hangover and the shame and the growing certainty that he'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. When he emerged, Marcus was in the kitchen making coffee. "How'd you get in?" Damien's voice was rough. "You gave me a key, remember? For emergencies." Marcus poured 2 cups, handed one to Damien. "This qualifies." "I'm fine." "You're not. But you're also not dead, so that's something." Marcus leaned against the counter. "I came by last night. You were unconscious on the bedroom floor. I considered calling an ambulance." "Why didn't you?" "Because you were breathing, and because I figured you were working through something." Marcus studied him. "Did it work?" "Did what work?" "The drinking. Did it give you any answers?" Damien took a sip of coffee. It was strong and black and exactly what he needed. "It gave me a headache and the certainty that I'm an idiot." "Well, that's a start." Marcus set down his cup. "So what now?" "Now I signed the custody agreement." "Just like that? You're giving up?" "I'm accepting reality." Damien sat down at the kitchen island. "Clara's right to protect herself and the baby. I've proven I can't be trusted. So she's setting boundaries and I'm going to respect them." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Who are you and what have you done with Damien Vale?" "Damien Vale is the problem. Maybe it's time to go back to being Daniel." The name felt strange in his mouth. He'd shed it years ago, along with everything else that felt too soft, too vulnerable, too human. But maybe that had been the mistake. "All right, Daniel," Marcus said, testing the name. "What's the plan?" "I don't know yet, but I know what it's not." Damien met his eyes. "I'm not going to fight her. I'm not going to use my resources to intimidate or control. I'm going to give Clara the space she's asking for, and I'm going to figure out how to be someone who deserves to be in that baby's life." "And the empire?" "You run it, temporarily, until I figure out who I am when I'm not performing being untouchable." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "You're serious?" "Completely." "People are going to see this as weakness." "Let them." Damien finished his coffee. "I've spent years being strong and ended up alone. Maybe weak is what I need right now." After Marcus left, Damien sat down and wrote an email to Jennifer Reeves. He kept it short and simple. "I've reviewed the custody agreement. I accept all terms as written. Please send the final documents for signature. And please tell Clara that I'm sorry, not because I expect forgiveness, but because it's true. I'm sorry for all of it." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he walked through the penthouse, really looking at it for the first time in months. The art that Clara had never liked. The furniture that looked impressive but wasn't comfortable. The kitchen that was meant for catering, not cooking. The nursery that stood perfect and waiting and utterly lifeless. This wasn't a home. It was a monument. And monuments were for dead things. Damien picked up his phone and made a call. "Riverside Realty, this is Beth speaking." "Hi, Beth. I need to sell a penthouse." The penthouse sold in 48 hours. 3 offers came in above asking price, each from someone eager to own a piece of sky, to look down at the city from 47 floors up and feel like they'd conquered something. Damien accepted the highest bid without negotiation and put everything into motion with the kind of efficiency he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. Beth from Riverside Realty was confused but delighted. "Mr. Vale, are you sure you don't want to think about this? Properties like this don't come around often. You might regret—" "I won't regret it," Damien said, signing the papers in her office. "Trust me." What he didn't tell her was that every minute he spent in that penthouse felt like drowning. The silence echoed with Clara's absence. The nursery mocked him with its perfect readiness. Even the view, that million-dollar view he'd once considered the ultimate status symbol, now just reminded him of how far he'd climbed and how alone he was at the top. Marcus thought he was having a breakdown. "You're selling the penthouse. You've handed me control of day-to-day operations. You're not returning calls from people who could destroy us if they wanted to. Damien, what the hell is going on? They were in a coffee shop. Damien's choice, not the usual conference rooms or high-end restaurants where business was conducted. Just a regular place with regular coffee and regular people who had no idea who he was. I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not performing, Damien said. And you need to dismantle your entire life to do that. Apparently, Damien stirred his coffee, watching the cream swirl into patterns. The penthouse was never a home, it was a statement. I'm done making statements. So where are you going to live? I found a place in Riverside. 2-bedroom, nothing fancy, walking distance from Evan's house. Marcus nearly choked on his espresso. You're moving to Riverside, to be near your brother-in-law who threatened you with a baseball bat. To be near my wife and child, Damien corrected. Even if Clara never speaks to me again, I want to be close. I want to be available. I want to show up. And you think moving to the suburbs is going to fix what you broke? No, but it's a start. Damien met Marcus's eyes. I spent years building an empire and I lost everything that mattered. So now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to get small, get quiet, get real. Marcus sat back, studying him with an expression somewhere between concern and respect. You know people are talking, right? The Southside crew thinks you've gone soft. The Castellanos are making moves because they think you're distracted. There are rumors you're stepping down entirely. Let them talk. Daniel, he corrected quietly. I'm trying out Daniel again. Marcus absorbed this, then nodded slowly. All right, Daniel, but you need to understand something. The empire you built doesn't just disappear because you decide to get small. You've got responsibilities, people who depend on you, agreements that need to be honored. You can't just walk away. I'm not walking away, I'm delegating. You're capable of running things. For how long? As long as it takes. Takes for what? Damien looked out the window at the ordinary street, ordinary people living ordinary lives. For me to become someone worth coming home to. The move happened on a Thursday. Damien hired movers to pack up the penthouse, keeping only the essentials and donating everything else. The custom furniture, the expensive art, the designer everything. He let it all go. What remained fit into a small moving truck. His clothes, some books, his laptop, and the pile of baby clothes Clara had folded that last night. The house in Riverside was exactly what the listing had promised. Modest, simple, in need of minor repairs. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with appliances that had seen better days. No marble floors, no floor-to-ceiling windows. No view of anything except a quiet street lined with trees and houses where families actually lived. It was perfect. Damien stood in the empty living room listening to the sounds that had been absent from the penthouse. Birds singing, a lawnmower somewhere down the street, children laughing in a nearby yard. Normal sounds. Human sounds. This is really what you want? The moving truck driver was looking at him skeptically. My buddy told me about your old place, penthouse downtown. This is kind of a downgrade, man. It's an upgrade, Damien said, and meant it. After the movers left, he unpacked slowly, deliberately, hung his clothes in a closet that was a fraction of the size of his old one, put books on simple shelves, set up his laptop on a desk that wobbled slightly, put Clara's carefully folded baby clothes in the second bedroom, even though he had no idea if he'd ever get to use that room for its intended purpose. By evening, the house was as settled as it was going to get. Damien ordered pizza from a place down the street, not artisanal, not gourmet, just regular pizza from a regular shop. He ate it sitting on the floor because he hadn't bought furniture yet, and it tasted better than anything his private chef had ever prepared. His phone rang. Jennifer Reeves. Mr. Vale, I received your signed custody agreement. Good. I also received a rather large check made out to Clara, with a note that said, for the baby. Damien had sent it that morning, enough to cover any expenses Clara might have, medical bills, supplies, whatever she needed, not because he expected gratitude, but because it was the bare minimum of what he owed. Is there a problem? He asked. Clara wanted me to tell you that she doesn't need your money. She's financially stable and capable of providing for the baby herself. The words stung, even though Damien understood them. Clara didn't want to be bought or maintained. She wanted a partner, not a benefactor. Can you tell her to keep it anyway? Not for her. For the baby. Put it in a trust, use it for college, whatever. I just want to help. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. I'll pass that along. I'll also tell you that Clara appreciated your email. The apology. Damien's heart kicked up. Is she... How is she? That's not information I'm authorized to share. Is the baby okay? They're both healthy. That's all I can tell you. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Thank you. Mr. Vale. Daniel saw it. Jennifer corrected herself. Can I give you some unsolicited advice? Please. Clara showed me the custody agreement you signed. No pushback, no negotiation, full acceptance of all terms. That surprised me. Why? Because men like you usually fight. They use their resources and their lawyers and their connections to win. But you didn't. You just accepted the consequences of your actions. She paused. That matters. I want you to know that. I'm not trying to win anymore, Damien said quietly. I'm trying to deserve a second chance. Then keep doing what you're doing. Give her space, respect her boundaries. Show up when it matters. And maybe, you'll get that chance. After they hung up, Damien sat in the growing darkness of his new house and let himself feel something he'd been avoiding for days. Hope. Fragile, terrifying hope that he hadn't completely destroyed everything. The next morning, he woke up to knocking on his door. When he opened it, Evan Hart was standing on his porch, arms crossed, expression somewhere between hostile and curious. So you actually moved here, Evan said. I did. Why? To be close to Clara and the baby. Evan snorted. Clara doesn't want you close. That's the whole point of the custody agreement. I know, but when the baby comes, I want to be 5 minutes away, not 45. I want to be available for midnight feedings or emergencies or whatever she needs, even if she never asks. Evan studied him for a long moment. He was shorter than Damien, stockier, with the kind of permanent suspicion that came from watching his sister get hurt. You know she cried for 3 days straight after she got that photo? The words hit like a fist. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you broke my sister's heart while she's carrying your child, and now you're playing at being reformed. Evan stepped closer. I don't buy it. I think this is a performance. I think you're trying to win her back so you can go right back to being the asshole who sent that picture. You're wrong. Prove it. How? Evan jabbed a finger at Damien's chest. By staying away from her. By letting her heal. By not making this about you and your guilt and your redemption arc. Clara doesn't exist to make you feel better about yourself. I know that. Then act like it. Stop lurking in Riverside. Stop sending checks. Stop trying to insert yourself into her life. Just stay away. Every instinct Damien had built over years of fighting for what he wanted screamed at him to argue, to push back, to refuse. But he thought about Clara, 7 months pregnant, trying to build a life that felt safe, trying to prepare for motherhood without the chaos he'd brought into her world. Okay, he said quietly. Evan blinked. Okay? You're right. This isn't about me. It's about Clara feeling safe and happy and prepared. If my presence makes that harder, I'll stay away. Just like that? Just like that. Damien met Evan's eyes. I love her. I've loved her terribly, selfishly, destructively, but I do love her. And if loving her means giving her space, then that's what I'll do. Evan's expression flickered, still suspicious, but with something else underneath, maybe surprise, maybe grudging respect. She talks to me, you know, Evan said after a moment, about you, about the pregnancy, about what she's going to do after the baby comes. Damien's chest tightened. And she's scared. Scared of doing this alone, scared of being a single mother, scared that you'll show up and disappoint her all over again. Evan's voice softened slightly. But she's also sad, because despite everything, she still remembers who you used to be, before the empire, before the power, before you forgot that she existed. I never forgot. Yes, you did. You forgot her every time you chose a meeting over dinner, every time you stayed out late without calling, every time you looked through her instead of at her. Evan shook his head. She became invisible to you, man, and that's worse than leaving. At least leaving is honest. The truth of it sat heavy in Damien's chest. He had made Clara invisible, had turned her into part of the scenery of his successful life, no more remarkable than the expensive furniture or the art on the walls. I can't undo what I did, Damien said, but I can try to be different going forward. Words are easy. Let's see if you can follow through. Evan turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, she kept your letter. What letter? The one you wrote her, years ago when you first started dating. She showed it to me last week. You wrote about building a life together, about being partners, about how she made you want to be better than you thought you could be. Evan looked back at him. That person, the one who wrote that letter, that's who she's mourning, not the king you became. After Evan left, Damien went inside and searched through the boxes he'd brought from the penthouse. Buried in a file of old papers, he found a copy of the letter Evan had mentioned. He'd written it 4 years ago, early in their relationship, when everything felt possible, and he still believed love was enough. His handwriting looked younger somehow, less controlled. The words were earnest and unguarded in a way he hadn't been in years. Clara, I know I'm not easy. I know I work too much and worry too much, and sometimes forget to say the things that matter. But you make me want to try harder. You make me believe I can be more than I am. Whatever life we build together, I promise I'll show up for it. I promise I'll choose you. Every day, every decision, I'll choose you. Love, Daniel. He'd broken every promise in that letter, every single one. Damien folded the paper carefully and put it in his wallet, a reminder of who he'd been and who he'd promised to become. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Damien's life. He woke up in a house that felt foreign, went to a job he was no longer running, and came home to silence that felt both peaceful and suffocating. Without the constant demands of his empire, he had time. Too much time. Time to think, to remember, to regret. He filled it as best he could. He learned to cook, badly at first, burning rice and overcooking pasta, but gradually improving. He read books he'd been too busy to read. He walked through Riverside in the evenings, anonymous and unimportant, just another person moving through the world. And he went to therapy. The therapist's office was in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation service. Dr. Sarah Chen was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and unimpressed by his history. She listened to his story without judgment, then asked the question that unraveled him. What do you think you were running from? I wasn't running from anything. I was building something. Were you? Sarah tilted her head. Because from what you've described, you were constantly in motion, constantly acquiring, achieving, proving. That doesn't sound like building. It sounds like fleeing. From what? That's what we're going to figure out. Over the following sessions, Sarah helped Damien excavate the answer. He'd grown up poor, not destitute, but close enough to see how precarious everything was. His father had worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep the electricity on consistently. His mother had cleaned houses to afford groceries. Damien had watched them struggle and had made a vow. He would never be that vulnerable again. So he'd built an empire, built walls, built a version of himself that couldn't be hurt because he refused to need anything or anyone. And Clara? Sarah asked during their 5th session. She got past the walls. I didn't mean to let her in, but she saw me. The real me. And she loved me anyway. And that terrified you. Yes, the admission came out rough. Because if she really knew me, if she saw past the performance, she might realize I'm not worth loving. So you pushed her away. I made her invisible. If she couldn't see me, I couldn't disappoint her. Sarah nodded. And then you sent that photo. I was drunk and stupid and trying to prove I was still in control. Or you were trying to make her leave before she could see the truth and choose to leave anyway. Self-sabotage disguised as arrogance. The insight cut deep. Damien had convinced himself the photo was a moment of reckless pride. But maybe it was something darker. Maybe he'd destroyed his marriage before Clara could wake up and realize she'd married someone unworthy. So what do I do now? He asked. You do the hardest thing possible. You accept that you might not get her back. You accept that consequences are real, and you work on becoming someone who deserves love, whether or not Clara is there to witness it. Marcus called every few days with updates Damien barely processed. The Castellanos had settled their territory dispute. The Southside crew had tested boundaries and been reminded why Damien Vale's empire still stood. Business continued, money flowed, power consolidated. You don't even sound interested, Marcus said during one call. I'm interested. I'm just not invested the same way. What changed? I used to think the empire mattered more than anything, that being powerful meant being untouchable. Now I know that's a lie. The empire is just a thing I built. It's not who I am. Then who are you? Damien looked around his small house, at the simple furniture he'd bought from a second-hand store, at the kitchen where he'd burned dinner the night before. I'm figuring that out. 2 months after Clara left, Damien saw her. He was at the grocery store, a regular chain store where he now did his own shopping, when he spotted her in the produce section. 8 months pregnant now, her belly pronounced and beautiful, her face carrying a serenity he'd never seen when they were together. She was examining avocados, testing them for ripeness with the kind of focus she brought to everything. She wore a simple dress and comfortable shoes, and she looked more real than anyone in his old life ever had. Damien's first instinct was to approach her, to say something, anything to bridge the 2 months of silence. But then he remembered Evan's words. This isn't about you. So instead, he watched from a distance as Clara selected her avocados, moved to the tomatoes, picked up fresh basil with a small smile, like she was planning something delicious. She looked happy, settled, like she was building a life that didn't include him. And instead of making him angry or desperate, it made him grateful. She'd escaped. She'd chosen peace over chaos, health over toxicity. She'd saved herself and their baby from the wreckage he'd made of their marriage. Clara moved toward the checkout. Damien waited until she was gone before finishing his own shopping, his hands shaking slightly as he picked up eggs and bread and the ordinary things that filled his ordinary life. That night, he wrote her a letter. Not an email, not a text. A real letter on real paper, written by hand with the kind of care he used to reserve for business contracts. Clara, I saw you today at the grocery store. You looked happy. I'm glad. I'm writing this not because I expect a response, but because I need you to know I'm not the man who sent that photo anymore. I'm working on becoming someone better, someone who deserves to be in our child's life. I've sold the penthouse, moved to Riverside, started therapy, handed off the day-to-day running of the business to Marcus. I'm trying to get small enough to fit into a real life instead of a performance. I don't know if any of this matters to you. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I want you to know I'm trying. Not to win you back. I know I don't deserve that. But to become someone our child won't be ashamed of. Someone you won't regret having loved, even if it's only in the past tense. I hope you're well. I hope the baby is healthy. I hope you found the peace you were looking for when you left. Love, Daniel. He mailed it the next morning, dropping it in the blue mailbox on the corner and watching it disappear into the slot. No expectations, no demands, just truth. 3 days later, a letter arrived at his house. Clara's handwriting, his name on the envelope. Damien's hand shook as he opened it. Daniel, I got your letter. I don't know what to do with it. Part of me wants to believe you've changed. Part of me thinks this is temporary, that you'll get bored of being ordinary and go back to being the king. I'm not ready to trust you yet. Maybe I'll never be ready. But Evan told me you've been respectful, that you stayed away when he asked, that you signed the custody agreement without fighting. That matters. The baby is due in 4 weeks. I'm scared and excited and trying to prepare for everything. I've been going to birthing classes, setting up the nursery in Evan's guest room, reading books about motherhood that make me feel both empowered and terrified. I miss who you used to be. I miss the man who wrote me letters and cooked terrible breakfasts and made me feel like the most important person in the world. I don't know if that person still exists, but I hope he does. For the baby's sake. For all our sakes. Clara Damien read the letter 5 times, parsing every word for hidden meaning, for hope, for anything that suggested a path forward. She wasn't ready to forgive him, but she wasn't closing the door completely either. It was more than he deserved. It was enough to keep trying. He wrote back, "Thank you for responding. I'll keep working. I'll keep showing up. And when the baby comes, I'll be ready to be whatever you need me to be, even if that's just someone who sends child support and shows up for supervised visits. You're not alone in this, even if it feels like you are. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm 5 minutes away. Daniel." The letters continued over the following weeks, short exchanges, nothing intimate, just 2 people navigating the impossible space between what they'd been and what they might become. Clara told him about her cravings for pickles and ice cream. He told her about burning dinner and learning to cook from YouTube videos. She mentioned that the baby was active at night, kicking her ribs. He admitted he'd bought a book about fatherhood and had no idea if he'd ever get to use the information. Neither of them mentioned the photo. Neither of them talked about divorce or reconciliation or anything beyond the immediate reality. A baby was coming, and they were both trying to be ready. 4 weeks became 3. 3 became 2. Damien prepared his small house as best he could, stocked diapers and formula just in case, assembled a crib in the second bedroom even though he might never use it, read every parenting book he could find. And then, on a Tuesday night at 11:30, his phone rang. Evan's number. Damien's heart stopped. "Hello? It's time." Evan's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Her water broke. We're heading to Riverside General. She asked me to call you. I'm on my way." Damien grabbed his keys and ran. Riverside General Hospital was a 15-minute drive that Damien made in 8, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every slow driver an obstacle between him and the moment that would change everything. "She asked me to call you." Those 5 words replayed in his mind like a prayer. Clara could have gone through this without him, could have let Evan be the only support she needed. But she'd asked for him. After everything, after the photo, after the betrayal, after months of silence, she'd asked for him. The hospital parking lot was half empty at this hour. Damien abandoned his car in the first spot he found and ran through the automatic doors into the fluorescent brightness of the lobby. A tired receptionist looked up from her computer. "Labor and delivery," Damien said, breathless. "Clara Vale, my wife, she just came in." The receptionist typed slowly, maddeningly slowly. "3rd floor. Take the elevators to your left. Check in at the nurses' station." Damien was already moving. The elevator took forever to arrive, and when it did, it stopped on the 2nd floor to let an orderly wheel out an empty gurney. Finally, the 3rd floor. The doors opened onto a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and possibility. The nurses' station was directly ahead. A young nurse with kind eyes looked up as he approached. "I'm looking for Clara Vale. I'm Daniel, her husband." The nurse checked her chart. "She's in room 314. But sir, I need to warn you, she's only 3 centimeters dilated. It could be a long night. Labor with first babies often takes... I don't care how long it takes. I just need to see her." The nurse's expression softened. "Room 314 is down the hall to your right. Her brother is with her now. Just be gentle, okay? She's in a lot of pain." Damien nodded and walked down the hallway on legs that felt disconnected from his body. "Tresimti chetrapad smitayas." The door was partially open, and through it he could hear Clara's voice, tight with pain. "I can't do this. Evan, I can't. It hurts too much." "Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I know. You left a man who didn't deserve you while 7 months pregnant. You rebuilt your whole life. You can absolutely do this." Damien stopped outside the door, frozen. Part of him wanted to burst in, to be there for her, to somehow make this easier. But another part, the part that had been learning to step back, to not make everything about him, knew he needed permission first. He knocked softly. The conversation inside stopped. Then Evan's voice. "Come in." Damien pushed open the door. The room was small and functional. A hospital bed with monitors beeping softly, a chair where Evan sat, a window overlooking the parking lot. And in the bed, Clara. She looked exhausted already, her hair pulled back, her face pale except for 2 spots of color high on her cheeks. She wore a hospital gown and had one hand pressed protectively over her enormous belly. When she saw Damien, something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or fear, or something too complicated to name. "You came," she said softly. "You asked me to." Damien stayed near the door, unsure if he was allowed to come closer. "I'll always come when you ask." Evan stood up. "I'm going to get coffee. Give you 2 a minute." He paused next to Damien, his voice low. "Don't make me regret calling you." Then he was gone, and Damien and Clara were alone for the first time in 3 months. "How are you feeling?" Damien asked, which was possibly the stupidest question in the world given the circumstances. Clara almost smiled. "Like there's a person trying to claw their way out of my body. The contractions are about 6 minutes apart. The doctor said I'm in for a long night. Can I? Damien gestured toward the chair Evan had vacated. Can I sit? Yes, please. He moved carefully, like any sudden movement might shatter the fragile permission she'd granted. Up close, he could see the lines of pain bracketing her mouth, the way her hands trembled slightly on the blanket. I got your letters, Clara said. All of them. I didn't expect you to respond to everyone. I just needed you to know I was thinking about you, about the baby. I know. It helped. Knowing you were trying. She winced as another contraction started, her whole body tensing. Damien watched helplessly as she breathed through it, counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The contraction peaked and then slowly released its grip. Clara sagged back against the pillows, exhausted. What can I do? Damien asked. There has to be something. There isn't. You just have to wait. We both do. What? She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd entered the room. You look different. I am different. How? Damien considered the question. How could he explain the past 3 months, the therapy sessions, the small house, the learning to cook and be alone with his thoughts, the slow, painful process of dismantling the empire he'd built inside himself? I sold the penthouse, he started. Moved to Riverside. Gave Marcus control of the business. Started seeing a therapist twice a week. Learned that I was running from vulnerability and calling it ambition. Clara's eyes widened slightly. You're in therapy? Have been for 2 months. Turns out I have a lot to work through. Like what? Like the fact that I built an empire because I was terrified of being powerless. Like the fact that I made you invisible because you saw the real me, and that scared me more than any business rival ever could. Like the fact that I sent that photo because some broken part of me wanted to destroy our marriage before you could wake up and realize you deserved better. The words hung in the air between them. Clara's expression was unreadable. Dr. Chen, my therapist, she says I'm a work in progress, Damien continued. That healing isn't linear, that I'm going to mess up again. But I'm trying, Clara. I'm really trying to become someone worthy of being this baby's father. And maybe, someday, worthy of being your partner again. Daniel? Clara stopped, correcting herself from the harder Damien to the softer name he had asked her to use years ago. I don't know if we can go back. I know. I'm not asking to go back. I'm asking for the chance to go forward, differently. Before Clara could respond, another contraction hit. This one was stronger and she gasped, her hand clutching the bed rail. Without thinking, Damien reached out and took her other hand. She gripped it hard enough to hurt, her nails digging into his palm as she rode out the wave of pain. Breathe, he said softly. You're okay. I've got you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He counted with her through the contraction, his voice steady even though his heart was racing. When it passed, Clara didn't let go of his hand. Thank you, she whispered. Always. Evan returned with coffee and stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Damien and Clara, hands clasped, something fragile and hopeful building in the space between them. Contraction? Evan asked. A bad one, Clara confirmed. They're getting closer together. Evan handed her a cup of ice chips. The nurse said you can have these. Nothing else until after delivery. The hours that followed blurred together into a strange, suspended reality. Contractions came and went, each one stronger than the last. The doctor checked in periodically, measuring progress with clinical efficiency. 4 centimeters. 5. 6. Clara's pain intensified, and with it, her exhaustion. Damien stayed. Evan had offered to take shifts, to give him breaks, but Damien refused. Every time Clara's hand reached out during a contraction, he was there. Every time she needed ice chips or a cool cloth or just someone to count her through the breathing, he provided it. Around 3 in the morning, when Clara was 7 centimeters dilated and crying from the pain, she looked at Damien with red-rimmed eyes. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? Of everything. Of the pain getting worse. Of something going wrong, of being a terrible mother, of doing this alone. You're not alone, Damien said firmly. I'm here. Evan's here. You have people who love you, and you're going to be an incredible mother. How do you know? Because you left me to protect this baby. You chose peace and safety over comfort and familiarity. You're already making the hard choices that good parents make. Clara's laugh was watery. That's a really backwards compliment. It's the truth. Damien squeezed her hand. And when this baby comes, whether or not you and I are together, I'm going to show up. For every midnight feeding, every doctor's appointment, every moment you need backup. I'm going to be the father I promised to be when I wrote you that letter 4 years ago. The letter, Clara murmured. I read it last week. You promised to choose me every day. I broke that promise, I know, but I'm asking for the chance to make a new one. To choose both of you every day for the rest of my life. Before Clara could respond, the doctor entered. Doctor. Patricia Morrison was in her 50s, calm and competent, with the air of someone who'd delivered thousands of babies and knew exactly how to handle the drama that came with them. Let's check your progress, she said, pulling on gloves. After a quick examination, she smiled. You're at 10 centimeters, Clara. It's time to push. The word sent a spike of panic through the room. Clara's grip on Damien's hand tightened to the point of pain. I'm not ready. I can't. Yes, you can, doctor, Morrison said firmly. Your body is ready. This baby is ready. Now we just need you to trust yourself. She looked at Damien. Dad, are you staying? Damien looked at Clara. Do you want me to? Clara's eyes were wide with fear and pain and something that looked like hope. Yes. Please, I need you. I need you. 3 words that rewrote everything. Then I'm staying, Damien said. Evan moved to Clara's other side. The nurses repositioned the bed, adjusted monitors, prepared the room with practiced efficiency. Dr. Morrison took her position at the foot of the bed. All right, Clara, on the next contraction, I need you to push. Really push. Like you're trying to have the biggest bowel movement of your life. Under any other circumstances, the description would have been funny. Right now, it was just terrifying. The contraction came like a wave, and Clara bore down, her face going red with effort. Damien counted for her. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, while Evan encouraged her from the other side. Good, Dr. Morrison said. That's good. Rest now. Next contraction, we'll do it again. They fell into a rhythm. Contraction, push, rest. Contraction, push, rest. Clara's exhaustion was palpable, her strength wavering with each cycle. Sweat dampened her hair. Her hospital gown clung to her. But she kept pushing, kept fighting, kept bringing their child into the world with a determination that left Damien in awe. I can see the head, Dr. Morrison announced. Clara, you're almost there. A few more good pushes. I can't, Clara sobbed. I'm too tired. I can't do it. Yes, you can, Damien said, his voice fierce. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You survived me. You survived leaving. You can absolutely survive this. Our baby is almost here. Just a little more. Clara looked at him, tears streaming down her face, and nodded. When the next contraction came, she pushed with everything she had left. That's it, Dr. Morrison exclaimed. Heads out. One more push for the shoulders. Clara screamed through the final push, a sound of agony and triumph combined. And then, suddenly, shockingly, there was a new sound in the room. A baby crying. It's a girl, Dr. Morrison announced, lifting a tiny, red-faced, furious creature into the air. You have a daughter. Time stopped. Everything Damien thought mattered. The empire, the power, the money, the status. All of it evaporated in the face of this small, perfect, screaming human. His daughter. Their daughter. The nurses cleaned her quickly and placed her on Clara's chest. The baby's cries softened to whimpers, then to silence as she felt her mother's heartbeat. Clara's hands came up to cradle her, tears of exhaustion and joy and relief streaming down her face. Hi, baby girl, Clara whispered. Hi, we've been waiting for you. Damien couldn't speak, couldn't move, could barely breathe. He just stared at the two of them, his wife and his daughter, and felt something crack open in his chest. Not the breaking he'd felt when Clara left, but something else. Something like rebirth. Do you want to cut the cord, Dad? One of the nurses asked, offering him scissors. Damien looked at Clara. She nodded, still crying, still smiling. With shaking hands, Damien cut the umbilical cord that had connected his daughter to her mother for 9 months. The nurse took the baby briefly for weighing and measuring, calling out statistics that Damien barely processed. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, 20 inches long. Perfect APGAR scores. Then the baby was back on Clara's chest, wrapped in a soft blanket, her tiny face scrunched and red, and absolutely beautiful. "She has your nose," Clara said softly, "and your chin." "She has your eyes," Damien countered. "Look at them." Evan, who had been quietly crying in the corner, came closer. "She's perfect, Clara. You did it." "We did it," Clara corrected, looking at Damien. "All of us." Dr. Morrison finished the final medical procedures and stepped back. "I'll give you some family time. Congratulations, all of you." When they were alone, Damien, Clara, Evan, and the baby, the room fell into a hushed, sacred silence. The baby made small noises, little sighs and squeaks as she adjusted to being outside the womb. Clara looked exhausted but radiant, her hand protective over their daughter. "Have you thought about names?" Evan asked. "I had a list," Clara said, "but now that she's here, none of them feel right." She looked at Damien. "What do you think?" The question felt like trust, like partnership, like a door opening. "What about Emma?" Damien suggested. "It means whole or universal, complete." Clara tested the name silently, looking down at their daughter. "Emma. Emma Vale." She smiled. "I love it. Emma, it is." The baby, Emma, yawned, a tiny, perfect expression of peace, and Damien felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not power, not control, not the satisfaction of acquisition or achievement, just love. Pure, uncomplicated, overwhelming love. "Can I—" His voice broke. "Can I hold her?" Clara's eyes searched his face, looking for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she carefully transferred the small, warm bundle into Damien's arms. Emma weighed almost nothing and everything at the same time. Damien cradled her against his chest, terrified of dropping her, amazed by her tiny fingers and perfect eyelashes, and the way she seemed to already trust him to keep her safe. "Hi, Emma," he whispered. "I'm your dad, and I promise I'm going to do better for you than I did for your mom. I'm going to show up. I'm going to be present. I'm going to love you so much that you never doubt it, not for a second." Tears were running down his face now, unchecked. He didn't care. Let them fall. Let the armor crack. Let himself be vulnerable in front of this tiny person who would never care about his empire or his money or his power. She would only care if he was there. And he would be. Every day. For the rest of his life. "Daniel," Clara said softly. He looked up. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said, "for being here, for showing up. I know it doesn't fix everything, but it matters." "I'll keep showing up," Damien promised, "for as long as you'll let me." Evan cleared his throat. "I'm going to give you two some privacy. Call me if you need anything." He kissed Clara's forehead, looked at Emma with wonder, and left. Alone with Clara and their daughter, Damien carefully sat in the chair beside the bed, Emma still secure in his arms. She'd fallen asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. "She's perfect," he said. "She is." Clara watched them both. "I was so angry at you for months. I wanted to hate you, to cut you out completely and raise her alone." "You would have been justified." "Maybe. But then you started sending letters. And Evan told me you'd moved to Riverside. And I saw you at the grocery store looking lost in the produce section." Clara's smile was small but real. "You looked so normal, so human, not like the king who broke my heart, just like Daniel, the man I fell in love with." Damien's throat tightened. "I'm trying to find my way back to being him." "I can see that. But Daniel, I need you to understand something." Clara's voice grew serious. "I can't go through this again. I can't be invisible. I can't be second to an empire. If you're serious about being in Emma's life, in our lives, things have to be different. They will be. I've already started making them different. Starting is easy. Sustaining is hard." Clara shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. "I need to know that when things get difficult, when the business calls, when the power tempts you, you'll still choose us." Not just today, in this hospital room with our brand new daughter, but next month, next year, 10 years from now. I will. You promised that before. In that letter. I know, and I broke that promise. I have no right to ask you to believe me now. Damien looked down at Emma, at her peaceful, sleeping face. But I'm asking anyway. Give me a chance to prove it. We don't have to be married. We don't have to live together. We don't have to be anything except two people who love this little girl and want the best for her. Let me show you, through actions, not words, that I've changed. Clara was quiet for a long moment. What does that look like, practically? I stay in my house in Riverside. You stay with Evan or find your own place. I show up for Emma. Feedings, diaper changes, doctor's appointments, whatever you need. I rebuild trust slowly. I prove that I can be consistent. And maybe, someday, if you're ready, we talk about what comes next for us. No grand gestures, no trying to win me back with money or gifts or declarations. No grand gestures, Damien confirmed. Just steady, boring, reliable presence. The kind of love that shows up in sweatpants at 3 a.m. for a crying baby. Clara's eyes were bright with tears. I want to believe you. Then let me give you reasons to, one day at a time. Emma stirred in Damien's arms, making a small sound of protest. Clara reached out, and Damien carefully transferred their daughter back to her mother. Clara settled Emma against her chest, and the baby immediately calmed, recognizing the heartbeat she'd lived with for 9 months. She's going to need a middle name, Clara said. Any ideas? I was thinking Grace. Emma Grace Vale. It's perfect. She is Grace. Undeserved, unexpected, transformative Grace. Clara smiled. Look at you, getting philosophical. Fatherhood does that to a man, apparently. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Emma sleep, each of them processing the seismic shift that had just occurred. A baby had been born. A family had been created. The future, uncertain as it was, had begun. After a while, a nurse came in to check on Clara and Emma, to help with the first feeding, to explain what the next few hours would look like. Clara would stay in the hospital for at least a day, maybe 2. Emma would be monitored. Visitors would be limited. Dad, you can stay as long as you want, the nurse said to Damien. We have a fold-out chair that converts to a bed. Damien looked at Clara. Do you want me to stay? Clara hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I think I do. So Damien stayed. He stayed through the first feeding, awkward and beautiful, Emma figuring out how to nurse while Clara figured out how to be a mother. He stayed through the pediatrician's first visit, asking 1,000 questions about everything from sleep schedules to diaper contents. He stayed through the night, sleeping fitfully in the uncomfortable fold-out chair, waking at every sound Emma made. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when Clara was sleeping and Emma was awake, Damien held his daughter and made promises he intended to keep. I'm going to be better for you, he whispered. I'm going to show your mom that change is real. I'm going to teach you that power is nothing compared to love, and I'm going to make sure you never doubt that you're the most important thing in my world. Emma gazed up at him with unfocused eyes, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. She didn't understand the words, but somehow Damien felt like she understood the intention. This was his second chance, his opportunity to prove that the man who destroyed his marriage could become the father his daughter deserved. He wouldn't waste it. The first 2 weeks of Emma's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. Claire stayed with Evan, setting up the guest room as a makeshift nursery, and Damien showed up every single day. Not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with the quiet consistency he'd promised. He arrived at 7 each morning with coffee and breakfast, bagels from the shop Clara liked, fruit she could eat one-handed while nursing. He stayed through the morning feeding, learning to change diapers with fumbling hands that gradually became more confident. He held Emma while Clara showered or napped or simply sat in silence, recovering from the marathon of birth. Evan watched this routine with skeptical eyes, waiting for Damien to slip, to revert, to prove that this transformation was temporary. But days became weeks, and Damien kept showing up, not as the powerful businessman who commanded respect through fear, but as a tired new father in wrinkled t-shirts who sang off-key lullabies and Googled things like, "Is baby poop supposed to be that color?" "You're really doing this," Evan said one morning, finding Damien in the kitchen at 6 a.m., preparing bottles with the concentration of someone defusing a bomb. Doing what? Being a dad. Being present. I didn't think you had it in you. Damien measured formula carefully into the bottle. Neither did I. But she makes me want to be better. He looked at Evan. They both do. Clara's not ready to forgive you yet. You know that, right? I know, and I'm not asking her to. I'm just asking to be here. Evan nodded slowly. Keep it up. Maybe you'll surprise us both. The days developed a rhythm. Mornings with Emma while Clara rested. Afternoons when he'd return to his own house to work remotely, handling only the most essential business decisions while Marcus ran everything else. Evenings back at Evan's, helping with the bedtime routine, then going home to his empty house where he'd collapse into bed and do it all again the next day. It was exhausting. It was mundane. It was the hardest thing Damien had ever done. And it was also the most meaningful. 3 weeks after Emma's birth, Clara asked to see his house. I've been thinking, she said, Emma asleep in her arms. You keep showing up here, but I've never seen where you live, where Emma would stay during your custody time. Damien's heart kicked up. You want to come over? Is that okay? Of course. Whenever you want. The next afternoon, Clara pulled up to his small house in Riverside. Damien watched from the window as she extracted Emma from the car seat, with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times in 3 weeks. She looked beautiful in the afternoon light, tired and real, and nothing like the woman who used to wait in the penthouse wearing designer clothes and loneliness. He opened the door before she could knock. Welcome, he said, suddenly nervous. It's not much. Clara stepped inside, looking around with curious eyes. The house was clean but spare. Furniture from secondhand stores, walls that needed painting, floors that showed their age. Nothing like the penthouse with its marble and luxury. But in the second bedroom, visible through the open door, was the crib he'd assembled, the changing table he'd stocked, the rocking chair he'd bought hoping someday he'd get to use it. You set up a nursery, Clara said softly. I wanted to be ready, in case you ever needed me to take her overnight, or even just for a few hours. Damien gestured around. I know it's not fancy, but it's safe. And it's close. Clara walked through the small house, taking in details. The kitchen where he'd clearly been teaching himself to cook, cookbooks stacked on the counter, a pan soaking in the sink. The living room with its mismatched furniture and the parenting books piled on the coffee table. The bedroom with its simple bed and the photo on the nightstand. Not of his empire or his achievements, but of Clara, taken years ago when they were still happy. You kept that picture, she said, picking it up. I kept everything that mattered. I just forgot to act like it mattered until it was too late. Clara set down the photo and turned to face him. Emma was starting to stir, making the small grunting noises that preceded crying. She's going to be hungry soon. You can feed her here, if you want. The nursery has a rocking chair. So Clara settled into the chair Damien had bought and nursed their daughter in the room he'd prepared with hope and uncertainty. Damien stood in the doorway watching them and felt something shift in his chest. This was what home was supposed to feel like. Not impressive or expensive or designed to prove anything, just safe and warm and filled with the people who mattered. Daniel, Clara said quietly, can I ask you something? Why did you really send that photo? The question he'd been dreading, the one he'd asked himself 1,000 times in therapy. Damien came into the room and sat on the floor, his back against the wall, giving Clara space. I was drunk and stupid and trying to prove I was still in control, he started. But Dr. Chen helped me see it was more than that. I was terrified. Of what? Of you seeing who I really was and deciding I wasn't enough. I'd built this whole persona, the untouchable king, the powerful businessman, the man who had everything under control. But underneath all of that, I was just some kid who grew up poor and scared and convinced that vulnerability was weakness. Damien looked at Emma, nursing peacefully. You loved me anyway, the real me. And that was more terrifying than any business deal or rival or threat. Because if you really knew me and still left, it would prove what I'd always suspected, that I wasn't worth loving. So you sabotaged it first. Yes. I destroyed our marriage so I could tell myself it was my choice, my control. instead of facing the possibility that you might wake up one day and realize you deserved better. Clara was quiet, processing. Emma had fallen asleep mid-feeding, milk-drunk, and peaceful. Clara carefully adjusted her clothing and held their daughter against her shoulder. "That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me," she finally said. "I'm trying to be honest now about everything. It doesn't undo the hurt." "I know. Nothing can undo it. I can only try to do better going forward." Clara looked around the nursery, at the crib with its simple sheets, the changing table stocked with diapers and wipes, the small bookshelf already filled with board books. "You really have changed, haven't you?" "I'm trying, every day." "Show me the rest of your life," Clara said suddenly. "Not just this house. Show me what you do when you're not with Emma, how you spend your time, who you've become." So Damien did. Over the following days, he let Clara see the unglamorous reality of his new life. She came with him to therapy, sitting in Dr. Chen's waiting room with Emma while Damien worked through his issues. She saw him at the grocery store, carefully comparing prices and brands, like someone who'd learned the value of money by no longer using it to solve every problem. She watched him cook dinner, still not great at it, but improving, and laughed when he burned the garlic bread. "You really don't have a chef anymore," she said, amused. "Turns out cooking for yourself is humbling, and also kind of satisfying when it doesn't turn into charcoal." She met Marcus, who came to Riverside for a business update, and barely hid his shock at Damien's transformed life. "This is where you live now?" Marcus said, looking around the small house. "Voluntarily?" "This is where I live," Damien confirmed. "And you're happy?" Damien looked at Clara, who was feeding Emma on the couch, looking more at home in his modest living room than she ever had in the penthouse. "I'm getting there." After Marcus left, with instructions Damien barely registered about territories and deals that felt like someone else's life, Clara turned to him. "He thinks you've lost your mind." "He's probably right." "Have you lost your mind?" "No, I think I'm finding it." Damien sat beside her on the couch, careful not to crowd her space. "The empire, the power, the money, I thought that was success. But it was just noise. This is real. You and Emma, learning to be human again, this is what matters." Emma finished eating, and Clara burped her with practiced efficiency. "What happens to your empire if you stay like this? Small and quiet, and not in control? Marcus runs it, or I sell it piece by piece, or it falls apart. I don't know, and I'm trying not to care. The only thing I want to build now is a relationship with my daughter. And maybe, if you'll let me, repair what I broke with you." Clara's eyes were bright. "I'm still angry at you, some days more than others. When I'm exhausted at 3 a.m. and Emma won't stop crying, I remember that I'm doing this alone because you sent that photo. Because you chose pride over partnership." "I know. But then you show up the next morning with coffee, and you take Emma so I can shower, and you don't complain or keep score or act like you're doing me a favor. You just help, and it confuses me." "What confuses you?" "Whether this is real or another performance. Whether you've actually changed or you're just better at hiding who you are." Damien turned to face her fully. "I can't prove it's real except by continuing to show up. Day after day, month after month, year after year. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations. Just consistent, boring, reliable presence. That's all I have to offer." Clara looked down at Emma, now asleep in her arms. She deserves a father who's present, who shows up, who chooses her every single day. She has one. I promise you, she has one. And what about me? What do I deserve? The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility and pain. Damien took a breath. You deserve someone who sees you, who chooses you, who builds a life with you instead of around you. Someone who remembers that love is a verb, not a noun. Someone who shows up. He paused. I don't know if I can be that person perfectly. I'm going to mess up, but I'm asking for the chance to try. Clara's tears spilled over. I loved you so much. Before everything. I loved waking up next to you and making plans and believing we were building something together. And then you forgot I existed, and it broke something in me. I know, I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't enough. You're right, it's not. But it's a start. Damien carefully reached out and wiped a tear from Clara's cheek. She didn't pull away. I'm not asking you to forgive me today, or tomorrow, or even this year. I'm asking you to let me prove that change is real, that the man you fell in love with is still in here somewhere, trying to find his way back." Emma stirred, making a small sound. Clara rocked her gently, and the baby settled back into sleep. "I need time," Clara said finally. "I need to see that this is sustainable, that you won't wake up one day and decide being ordinary isn't enough. Take all the time you need. I'll be here." The weeks turned into months. Emma grew and changed, hitting milestones that filled Damien with wonder. Her first smile, her first laugh, the way she'd light up when she saw him. He was there for all of it, documenting everything with photos he sent to Clara, even though she was usually right there beside him. Clara slowly, cautiously, led him further into her life. She started coming to his house more often, staying for dinner, letting Emma nap in the nursery he'd prepared. She talked to him about things beyond logistics, her fears about motherhood, her dreams for Emma's future, her own plans to eventually go back to work. "I've been thinking about taking some online courses," she said one evening. They were sitting on his back porch while Emma slept in the baby monitor on the table between them. "Maybe finish my degree. I had 2 semesters left when we got married." "What were you studying?" "Psychology. I wanted to be a therapist." Damien smiled. "You'd be good at that. You always knew how to read people. Except you, apparently. I completely missed the signs that you were self-destructing. I was good at hiding, and you were good at giving me the benefit of the doubt." He paused. "You should finish your degree. I can watch Emma while you study, or we can hire help if you need it." "I don't want your money, Daniel." "It's not about money. It's about supporting your dreams, the ones I ignored when I was too busy building my empire." Clara looked at him in the gathering darkness. "You really mean that?" "Every word." 4 months after Emma's birth, Marcus called with news. "The Castellanos want to buy you out," he said. "All of it. Your territories, your contacts, your operations. They're offering $60 million. Damien sat on his back porch, watching Clara push Emma in a stroller around the small yard. "What do you think I should do?" "A year ago, you would have told them to go to hell, that the empire wasn't for sale at any price. And now?" "Now I think you should take it. You're not coming back, are you?" "Not really." "No, I'm not." "Then sell it. Walk away clean. Use the money to build something real instead of something powerful." Damien thought about the penthouse he'd sold, the life he'd abandoned, the person he'd been when power mattered more than presence. "Set up the meeting. I'll sell." "You're sure?" "Completely. The empire was never what I needed. I just didn't know it until I lost everything that mattered." The deal closed 3 weeks later. Damien signed papers that transferred everything he'd built over a decade to the Castellanos, and in return received a check that represented more money than most people saw in a lifetime. He put half in a trust for Emma, donated a quarter to organizations that helped families in poverty, the kind of poverty he'd grown up in, the kind that had driven him to build an empire in the first place. The remaining quarter he invested conservatively, enough to live on comfortably without ever working again if he chose. Then he called Clara. "Can I take you and Emma to dinner? Somewhere nice. I want to celebrate something." "Celebrate what?" "The end of the empire. The beginning of everything else." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Okay, but Daniel, nothing too fancy. I don't want to feel like you're trying to impress me with money." "How about that Italian place in Riverside? The one with the checkered tablecloths and the garlic bread you like?" "Perfect." They went to dinner as a family, Damien, Clara, and 6-month-old Emma, who sat in a high chair and gummed breadsticks while her parents talked. Damien told Clara about selling the business, about the relief he felt watching it go, about the foundation he wanted to start to help families like the one he'd grown up in. "You're really done with all of it?" Clara asked. "The power, the fear, the empire?" "Completely done. It was never real anyway, just performance. This," he gestured at the 3 of them, "at the ordinary restaurant full of ordinary people living ordinary lives. This is real." Clara reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact since Emma's birth, and the gesture made Damien's heart race. "I'm proud of you," she said softly, "for choosing differently, for actually changing instead of just talking about it. Does this mean—" "It means I'm ready to try. Not to go back to what we were, but to build something new, something better, something real." Emma chose that moment to throw her breadstick on the floor, and they both laughed. Damien retrieved it while Clara cleaned Emma's hands, and the moment was so beautifully mundane that Damien felt his eyes sting with tears. This was what he'd been chasing his whole life without knowing it. Not power or status or wealth. Just this. Connection. Presence. Love. 6 months later, Clara moved into the house in Riverside. Not back into a marriage. They both agreed they needed to rebuild that slowly, intentionally, with counseling and communication and conscious effort, but into a partnership. Two people raising a daughter together, learning to be teammates instead of strangers. The house felt different with Clara in it. She brought warmth and life, hanging photos and plants, cooking meals that actually tasted good, making the space feel like a home instead of a waiting room. Emma had her own room now, painted a soft yellow, filled with toys and books and love. Damien and Clara went to couples therapy every week, working through the damage he'd caused, learning new patterns of communication, building trust brick by careful brick. Some sessions were hard. Some left them both in tears. But they kept showing up, kept trying, kept choosing each other, even when it would have been easier to walk away. On Emma's first birthday, they threw a small party in the backyard. Evan came, bringing a ridiculously large stuffed elephant. Dr. Chen stopped by briefly, smiling at the progress her patient had made. Marcus showed up with his wife, shaking his head at how far Damien had fallen and risen simultaneously. "Look at you," Marcus said, watching Damien help Emma smash a cake with her tiny hands. "A year ago, you were running an empire. Now you're covered in frosting and grinning like an idiot." "Best decision I ever made," Damien said, wiping icing off Emma's face while she laughed. "Selling the business? Losing everything first, then choosing to build it back differently." That evening, after the guests had left and Emma was asleep, Damien and Clara sat on the back porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. "I've been thinking," Clara said. "About what?" "About us. About what we're building." She turned to face him. "I think I'm ready." "Ready for what?" "To try again. Really try. Not just co-parenting or partnership, but marriage. The real kind, where we're actually partners." Damien's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. You've shown up every single day for a year. You've done the work in therapy. You've proven that change is real. You've chosen us over everything else, repeatedly, without fail." She smiled. "I think the man I fell in love with is back. Or maybe he's new. Either way, I'm ready to build a life with him." Damien pulled her close, and Clara let herself be held. They sat like that for a long time, watching the sky fade from color to darkness, both of them understanding that this was the real victory. Not the empire he'd built, or the money he'd made, or the power he'd wielded, but this. Two broken people learning to heal together. A family built on presence instead of performance. "I love you," Damien said. "Not the way I loved you before, when I took you for granted, but deeper, realer, with every part of who I'm trying to become." "I love you too," Clara whispered, "and I forgive you. Finally, completely, I forgive you." The words released something in Damien's chest, a weight he'd been carrying for over a year. He'd done the work, made the changes, proven through actions that transformation was possible, and Clara had witnessed all of it, had chosen to believe in him, had given him the grace he didn't deserve but desperately needed. They renewed their vows 6 months later in the backyard of their small house, with Emma toddling between them in a white dress, carrying flowers she mostly tried to eat. No grand venue, no expensive photographer, just family and friends and a commitment to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. "I promise to see you," Damien said, holding Clara's hands while Emma pulled at his pant leg. "To choose you. To build a life with you, not around you. To show up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. To be your partner in everything." "I promise to trust you," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "To give you grace when you stumble. To build this life together as equals. To choose love over fear every single day." Evan officiated, still slightly suspicious, but unable to deny the evidence of change he'd witnessed. Marcus stood as best man, shaking his head at how completely Damien's life had transformed. And Emma, 18 months old and completely oblivious to the significance of the moment, chose that exact second to say her first clear word. Dada! Damien scooped her up, holding her while he kissed his wife, and felt something he'd spent years chasing finally settle into his bones. Not power, not status, not the hollow satisfaction of being untouchable. Just peace, just love, just the knowledge that he'd lost everything and found what actually mattered in the wreckage. Years later, Damien would look back on the night he sent that photo as the worst and best thing he'd ever done. Worst because of the pain it caused, the trust it shattered, the marriage it nearly destroyed. Best because it forced him to confront who he'd become and choose to be someone different. He'd started a foundation that helped families escape poverty, using his business acumen for something that actually mattered. Clara had finished her degree and opened a small therapy practice, specializing in helping women rebuild their lives after betrayal. Emma grew up knowing that her father chose her every single day, that presence was more valuable than presence, that real strength was consistency, not control. And sometimes, late at night when Emma was asleep and Clara was reading beside him, Damien would think about the penthouse he'd sold, the empire he'd abandoned, the version of himself he'd killed to become someone worth loving. He'd think about the selfie that had destroyed everything, and he'd be grateful. Because that one moment of arrogance had taught him the most important lesson of his life. You can own the whole world and still have nothing. You can be untouchable and still be completely alone. Real power isn't control or fear or wealth. Real power is choosing love when pride tells you to run. It's showing up when it would be easier to hide. It's admitting you were wrong and doing the work to become better. It's being willing to lose everything to find what actually matters. Damien Vale had been a king who ruled an empire built on fear. Daniel Vale was a father, a husband, a man who'd learned that the only thing worth conquering was his own worst impulses. And as he fell asleep beside the wife he'd nearly lost and the life he'd almost destroyed, he knew with absolute certainty which version of himself he'd rather be. The choice had cost him everything, and given him everything that mattered.